Happy Devils Tuesday. This is At the Point, episode 5. I'm your host, Sam Wu, here with Bruce Zeman, my partner in crime, streaming live on Facebook Live, YouTube Live, X Live, and Twitch on the Let's Go Devils Network. Talking a little bit NHL hockey. Expansion. Is it good? Is it bad? Talking some NHL news. Lots of stuff to go over. There were suspensions. Ooh. Anyway. Bruce, how are you, my friend?
Sam, great to be with you today as we talk about the greatest sport there is, hockey, National Hockey League, and you are right. There are suspensions a couple days before Thanksgiving. Lot to talk about.
Yeah, lots to talk about, but let's just start at the top. You said it, Bruce, but you kind of, I didn't think it would be this fast, but Jim Montgomery finding employment with the St. Louis Blues right away after getting let go by the Boston Bruins.
5 days, to be exact. You and I talked about what had gone on in Boston. I kind of expanded on what I thought. And I said in our last podcast that I thought that Jim Montgomery would have a job by Christmas. I was wrong. It was 5 days later. He signs a 5-year deal with the St. Louis Blues. And big news for St. Louis. Also big news for Boston, because a lot of people thinking that maybe General Manager Don Sweeney overreacted. What are your thoughts?
Well, here are my thoughts. I mean, Doug Armstrong came out and said, we were going to stick with our coach, but once this coach became a free agent right away, we had to pounce. Like, change the entire direction of the season, which I thought was pretty interesting. It was basically like, yeah, we were going with the flow, status quo, but whoo, Jim Montgomery available? Let's get him. Just like that. And they got their first win as well over the New York Rangers. So, Boston, well, I haven't checked, but they did get a 1-0 victory right afterwards, right, with the new interim head coach. And I haven't seen their record since that game. I don't know what that is, but you know what? I look at it as, if it works out for both franchises, let it be. You know, sometimes you've got to, I don't know. I think Jim Montgomery's a great coach, but if it's not working, it's not working. But if the new coach you put in Boston is working, then let it be.
I think you're right about that, because we don't know what's going on in the room, and we don't know if there's other factors behind the scenes. Perhaps the general manager of the Bruins didn't like what he was hearing from the players, because one thing folks have to understand, and you know, even as someone that's followed the NHL for years, like I have, like you have, I never realized until I spoke with someone at the end of last season about the impact that player exit interviews have on upper management. I guess at the end of the year, what happens is they sit down with the GM or their VP of player development or whoever. I guess each team does it different. And they talk about basically a job review for each player. And I'm wondering if maybe at the end of last year, Don Sweeney and Cam Neely and anybody else who was in those conversations, perhaps they heard something that they didn't like or they were worried about. You don't know if the coach lost the room. And when I say that, I'll talk about a quick anecdote. And Sam, you may have heard this already. NHL legend Scotty Bowman, who's got a slew of trophies. It's been written about by a number of players that he was a little prickly sometimes, and he was not always a player's coach. And it's been said by a couple of players that his players didn't like him 364 days a year. And the one day that they did like him was the day that they picked up their Stanley Cup ring. So you've got that going on, but we really don't know. But on the other side of the coin, if we're going to take a look at this from both sides, the Bruins do not really have a great track record with what they've done with their coaches. They did it to Bruce Cassidy a couple of years ago, who then went on and won the Cup with the Vegas Golden Knights. So we don't know. Could it be an overreaction? Yes. But from what I've read and a couple of other sources and contacts that I have, the Blues wanted Jim Montgomery all along, and it was never really set in stone that he was going to come back to Boston because they couldn't come up with a deal, and there was a lot of factors for that. But this is big news. I mean, 5 days later, he signs a 5-year contract because the Blues were one of the teams that we had talked about underperforming so far, and we'll see where this leads.
Yeah. At the same time, if you were Drew Bannister, what are you thinking? You know, I was kind of a stopgap coach. Then again, you know what? At the same time, if you think about it, Bruce, it sucks, but there are only so many jobs in the NHL to be a head coach. You know, right now there's 32, right? There's 32 teams that have a head coach. And you get the experience when you can, you know. So, but it kind of sucks because you're mid-flight into the season, and then suddenly you have a new coach. I wonder what the players think. You know, mid-season, all of a sudden the coach gets fired, and then a brand new coach. And I saw that video, the post-game speech that Montgomery had with his team. I don't know. I feel it's kind of weird in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's certainly awkward. And it doesn't seem like Drew Bannister got a fair shot.
No.
But again, who knows what he was told? I mean, I believe he had the interim title removed, and I believe did he have the interim title removed at the beginning of the season? He wasn't the interim head coach, right?
I think he had it removed over the summer. Yeah.
You know, it's one of those things where you don't know what the organization said to him. I mean, I'm sure they had to do something to make him whole, because 22 games is not really a great sample size. I mean, they were underperforming, but again, with the NHL and all professional sports being a what have you done for me lately league, you know, I mean, I wonder if there's any coach that would be safe if, you know, someone that's considered the best coach in the league becomes available. I mean, I'm curious to see what happens, and we alluded to this last week on the show. What's going to happen in the league if Mike Sullivan from the Penguins becomes available? Because I think a similar thing could happen. He's been coveted by a bunch of teams, and I'm not 100% sure about this, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. When a coach gets fired, they're still under contract. They could still be under contract. Depends what's in their contract. But they have to get permission to speak to other teams. Now, sometimes they have clauses in their contract that allow them to interview for other head coaching gigs. But if a team denies another team permission to speak with them, then he's still going to get paid and work for whatever franchise, you know, asked him. But I think it's interesting because I don't know if we've seen the last of Drew Bannister, but, you know, again, if this is a what have you done for me lately league and it's all about results, I mean, it's kind of not out of the realm of possibilities of what we should expect, I think.
Yeah, I mean, if you sometimes read articles or I'm sorry, the press releases, they never say fire. It's was relieved of their duties, head coaching duties, which is really legal technicality. You're still under contract. You're still getting paid. We just don't want you to be a head coach. We're moving on, but you're still getting paid. You know, till another team comes by and you know you ask for permission or whatnot. But usually the teams give permission because they want that coach to be off of payroll. You know. Essentially. So.
Well, that, and also, if the shoe is on the other foot at some point, they also want other teams to give them permission to speak to a coach that they might want to hire. I think another thing that came into play here, too, is I think it depends on the team. I think it depends on the coach. And in a lot of cases, I think if this happened to a higher profile coach and there was some type of dust up with a higher profile player, I think it would depend on, or a lot would have to do with what happens to that coach. And I'll give you an example. I think if this were to happen in a place like Edmonton or, another team with a really high profile player, even in New Jersey, and I'll just use that as an example, because even with New Jersey, where they've got a new head coach and a pretty big name coach in Sheldon Keefe, even though Sheldon Keefe is a really big name, I think if all of a sudden stuff started to bubble out that there was trouble between Sheldon Keefe and Jack Hughes, I think Sheldon Keefe would have a problem at some point because Jack Hughes ain't going anywhere. The same thing on a team like Edmonton that I just alluded to. If all of a sudden Connor McDavid had an issue with the coach, that's going to be an issue, But, Drew Bannister is he's not Scotty Bowman. He's not Mike Sullivan. So, it sounds like he did kind of get the short end of the stick, but we'll see if he's back.
Yeah. Will be remain to be seen, on that. But speaking of which, changing gears, NHL expansion, Bruce. Right now, there's 32 teams. We're looking at, I think it was Forbes magazine had every NHL franchise valuation over $1 billion USD right now. The league is thriving. I think the league is financially healthy compared to what it was in the late 90s. Now, there's a lot of economics that go through this. If you remember the late 90s, the Canadian dollar against the American dollar, it was a big difference. It was like 40%, 45%, I believe, if you remember, back in the day, Bruce. And Canadian franchises were just getting clobbered because of it, because of the currency exchange. And, at the time, the league went through expansion in this down south. You're talking about Florida Panthers. You're talking about Tampa Bay Lightning. Minnesota North Stars suddenly become the Dallas Stars. The Winnipeg Jets, part one, goes to Arizona, the Phoenix Coyotes, if you remember. And, I thought expansion was good, but come with it were the growing pains back in the mid-'90s and late 90s. The Seattle Kraken and the Vegas Golden Knights were the latest expansion teams, Bruce. The NHL learned a lot when they expanded very quickly in the 90s. I think the Golden Knights was a great model, and Seattle Kraken followed. I think, in my opinion, good or bad, I think it's good for the league because hockey as a whole has expanded worldwide, and there's more talent right now to fill those roster seats. If you go with expansion, than there ever has been, versus back in the early 90s, the talent pool is not as big as it is today.
No, and there's also a much more focus on international talent, too. Back in the day, some teams didn't have the ability to go to, Southeast Russia or wherever talent was, and now you can do that anywhere and everywhere. But to me, this is all about money. I mean, obviously, the Canadian dollar is a lot different now, but, it looks like the next two franchises that are coming in that, I've been able to research, it looks like Houston is a definite, And believe it or not, and I don't agree with this, they're going to give Atlanta a third shot. And, I understand that the goal is 36 teams. So it looks like they're going to try to add 4 more. And the starting point for an NHL expansion team, the buying into the league, is going to be at least $1 billion. That's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money, and it's free money for a lot of these owners. It's pure cash doing nothing, just being a member of the NHL. And obviously the owners love it. There is the Achilles heel of, if you don't want to dilute the talent where the product is not watchable. But the game was different than it was today. Back in the 90s, I mean, it was just like, every fourth line had their goons, if you remember. Back in the early 90s. You had your goons. You had guys that, they made a living with their fists. Yeah, it sold tickets, don't get me wrong. But right now, there's so much talent to go around. USA Hockey has expanded since 1980, since the 1980 team. And, Canada has always had talent. And then, the magic of the internet, now you can scout talent remotely. So I'm okay with it as long as you're not diluting the product.
Well, I think you're right, because there is a tremendous amount of talent now. And, the newer teams that have come in, the Seattle Kraken, have done well so far. I mean, you mentioned the Vegas Golden Knights. And I think what the owners are looking at when they bring new teams into the league is, as long as they can be competitive relatively quickly. I mean, when the Vegas Golden Knights came in, their owner promised the Stanley Cup. I think it was in 6 years, and I think he did it in 5. My only concern with situations like this, and they've kind of remedied this a little bit. I think you and I talked about this last year. At the time, we were talking about the Arizona Coyotes and the league propping that up. I know the NHL, and there's a lot of rumors that the NHL is going to go back to Arizona at some point with a different ownership group. But first and foremost, this is about money. I mean, if the NHL could put a team on Saturn, they would. And the reason that you've got these games in Europe, in Prague and everything, there has been discussions about putting a division, and I don't know how serious this is, but there's been discussions about having a European division. I mean, the NFL has looked at that too. And, the games in Prague that the Devils in Buffalo played earlier this year were pretty successful. I mean, my only concern with this is, yes, it's about the money, and that's what the owners care about. But if you're talking about the good of the game, I do think you need to add some more Canadian teams. And some of the situations which would be best for the game are not going to happen for money reasons. And I'll give you an example. There are 3 teams in the New York metropolitan area: the Devils, the Rangers, and the Islanders. There's really no reason that there couldn't be a second team in Montreal or Toronto, except for the fact that you've got the territorial rights, which the teams will never forego. But I mean, if you really wanted to do something for the good of the game, imagine the rivalry with the Maple Leafs if you put a second team in Toronto, or, another team near the Canadians. I mean, that'll never happen. But there are a number of Canadian cities that really could use a franchise. I mean, I think the NHL should have been back in Quebec 5 years ago. But we'll see what happens with that. But Atlanta, I just don't understand, except for the money.
Yeah, and it is a media capital outside of New York. I mean, with TNT and the NHL deal right now, I mean, it's split between TNT and ESPN. Maybe there are reasons for that. I'm kind of opposite. I felt strongly when the Thrashers, when they moved, had they stayed maybe another 5 years, it could have worked. That's just my opinion. I think a lot of factors happen, that's beyond your control. It's economic factors. I think 2008 was a big deal around the world, but especially in the United States. I think that was a big factor in Atlanta. People make fun of, there's no fans in Atlanta. That's far further from the truth. If you knew the nasty nest, that group of Atlanta Thrasher fans that was growing and growing and growing, and it was a great community, if they had just a little bit more time, and plus they had to deal with a lot of tragedy. I mean, the whole Danny Heatley and Dan Snyder episode, and then, Ilya Kovalchuk, not only screwed that franchise, he screwed the New Jersey Devils as well. It's most unfortunate. I just don't think I wasn't old enough about the Atlanta Flames, but I just don't think the Thrashers really got going. But same with the Columbus Blue Jackets. I mean, they've had a heck of a start to their NHL franchise after becoming an expansion team. I mean, all the tragedies, that child that lost her life because he got hit by a puck. Suddenly we have nets, and then the one prospect goaltender, with the firecracker, or fireworks, passes away. And obviously Johnny Gaudreau, that's your mark. He was the marquee of the franchise. He was the franchise, the big get for this little franchise called the Columbus Blue Jackets. But at the same time, I mean, look, I think expansion is good. If you want to grow the game, you have to expand. It's how they're going to do it. I think things are a lot different than they were in the 90s. And also, we have the salary cap. The NHL has a salary cap since 2004, 2005, around that time. When they were expanding without the salary cap, there was no cost certainty for a lot of these expansion teams. So a lot of these teams were taking the expansion money, that initiation fee that each new franchise would receive, and they were it's almost basically like getting a welfare check, one lump sum just to survive on that, but your team is not making money for whatever economic reasons they were not, doing so. So, some had, like the Devils, they had issues with their lease with their building. Others had, the currency exchange issue as well, like trying to sign players, but hey, it's 40% more in Canada, which crippled a lot of those franchises, for whatever reason. But I think right now, because of the salary cap and cost certainty, that's why you see Vegas and the Seattle Kraken working extremely well, and even the Minnesota Wild as well, because they came in late in the game right before that salary cap came in.
Well, you've also got stronger ownership groups in those cities that you just mentioned. I mean, really both of the Atlanta ownership groups with the Flames and the Thrashers were not strong, and I think you're right. If they've got an ownership group with some money and that knows how to build a team down there, because that is football country and NASCAR country. So if you've got an ownership group down there that knows how to build a product, and the other thing that you said that I think is 100% accurate is time. It takes time to build, a fan base and to build a winning tradition. I mean, let's take a look at South Florida. Before Tampa Bay and Florida won some championships, it was dicey down there for a while. I remember back in the day, I went to a Florida Panthers game and I sat downstairs and it was $8 for a ticket. There was no one there. Mm-hmm. And now, now that they've got a cup, and the same thing with the Lightning, it's a destination. So, kudos to the ownership groups for making that possible. But I want to throw this out there. When we talk about expansion, if you're going to give Atlanta a third shot, I really think you have to look up north, not only to a Canadian team, but I also think you have to look maybe to New England. I mean, what about bringing back the Hartford Whalers?
I think, honestly, out of all those proposals you just said, from a hockey standpoint, I would love Quebec to have a team like the Nordiques, but it's simply not going to happen. The economics isn't there. The politics isn't there. It's just simply not going to happen, unfortunately, because, there are a variety of reasons. It's a little bit different than Winnipeg, which is in the middle of nowhere. In terms of the Hartford Whalers, I think you could pull it off, but it is kind of a hard sell right now because a lot of them may be Ranger fans in Connecticut, or the other half are Boston Bruins fans. It's going to take time in Hartford. I don't know. But I would love Hartford to have a team. I really do.
I mean, the way I look at it, I didn't mean to step on you there, Sam. The way I look at this, if the league can prop up the Arizona/Phoenix Coyotes for a couple of years, you can give this a shot because I think you have a lot more people in Hartford that care about hockey than you did in Arizona. And I think it's worth giving that market a shot because you've got – because one of the other things, too, that's important is the rivalries. I mean, because that's one of the other things the league looks at. I mean, if they do this, I mean, if you put a team in Atlanta, you're going to have that rivalry immediately with the two Florida teams, probably with Dallas, with Carolina. But, I mean, if you put the team back in Hartford, you've got Boston, you've got Montreal, you've got Toronto, you got the New York teams. And so I think that would work. I think that would be a money-making prospect. But you're right, it takes time, and we'll see what happens with these new teams. But from what I'm reading, Houston and Atlanta are a go. And then as for the other two teams, there's about 5 or 6 cities that are in there. And you've got Hamilton, you've got Portland, you've got a couple of communities in Dallas and even Oklahoma City and Kansas City. So I guess we'll see.
Yeah, and unfortunately, you're going to have to look at the economics here. A lot of the taxes, come in play. I mean, you want your teams in your league to be competitive, and I think a lot of the Canadian teams have a disadvantage because, A, the population is not as big as the United States. So, and plus, there's, the distance between a lot of these cities are pretty great. So, you look at the costs of travel, plus, the currency exchange. Again, and I'll go back to the taxes because there's the province tax. I mean, Quebec is just absolutely ridiculous. Plus, all the restrictions and regulations and all this stuff, that all comes into account. And you know what? And that's just before you even start a franchise. You pay $1 billion, then you got all sorts of things, to try to build a new arena and luxury suites. I mean, have you noticed that Rogers and Bell are like really the only primary sponsors of these buildings?
Well, you're right. I mean, the money is an issue. But again, I think when you get to that level, that type of business level, I think the league would have to work with the province of work with Quebec and basically say to them, listen, if you want a team here, you're going to have to hook us up with some concessions and I don't even know if they can do that. I'm just, hypothesizing here that, because of the jobs and the revenue that would bring. But you're right. I mean, there's, it just gets to a point where it's so restrictive that, they're not going to do it. But for me, and I'm not talking as from a business standpoint, I'm just talking as a kind of a fan here. If you can do it with Arizona and prop them up for a couple of years, I mean, I think it's worth a look at. But I mean, again, they're going to go to Atlanta, which, as you said, is a big media capital, and they're going to go to Houston and maybe even Austin. Texas is a pretty big. Do you realize how big Texas is?
It's big, and you know what? There's no state income tax for individuals, and it's a very tax-friendly state. Plus, you're going to get a lot of energy down there, as well.
Yeah.
Because ice rinks, it takes a lot to keep an ice rink open. It takes a lot of electricity. So sorry, I didn't mean to get into all the economics and all that kind of stuff, but that has a lot to do with why these franchises are where they are.
Well, it matters. It's a big reason. Listen, and I know I say this all the time, but it's a business, and again, for those of us that love the game as former players or just as fans, It's a great sport, but above everything else, these are businesses.
Yep.
And if you think that, and there's exceptions to this, the owners of all these teams in all the sports, MLB, the NFL, the NHL, yeah, they care about the fans, but you know what they care about? Number one, money. And that's what this is all about, whether it's a TV deal, a revenue deal, or negotiating contracts. The most important thing to every one of these owners is money.
Okay. Gotcha. All right. So moving to our next topic before we talk Devils. The New York Rangers are making news. Suddenly, one bad loss. Seems like everybody's on the block. Do you believe it or don't you believe it?
Well, we talked about an overreaction potentially with the Bruins and the whole Jim Montgomery firing and everything. The New York Rangers have got a really good team. I think they've just hit kind of a rough patch, and I do think the Shesterkin thing is becoming a distraction to the team. They're not going to come out and say that it is, but they haven't been playing well in the last couple of games. I mean, there's some rumblings. I was reading something on the boards yesterday, I think it was, that there's reports that Chris Drury is looking at shaking up the roster, and apparently Chris Kreider and Jacob Trouba and a couple of other big names, they're available. The Rangers are open for business. I would be shocked if they would, not Trouba, but I can't imagine, this is coming for someone that, identifies as a Devils fan, I cannot imagine the Rangers moving him unless you got something of equal value. You package Chris Kreider and, I'm just making this up, Panarin, and, you send him to Colorado for Cale Makar. That's a trade that I'd make.
Well, I wonder who leaked that, and I think this was a strategic leak that they're on the block, right? Because I think it kills like 5 birds with one stone. Number one, you get a fair valuation on what your players are worth on the open market in November, right? So, if you leak something like that out, Bruce, you're going to get phone calls, and you see where you stand. You know where your team stands. It also holds the players accountable. Here we go again. Trouba. It was all summer long. And then now Kreider or whoever may be on the block. I think honestly, I think that information was leaked through sources as per usual. And I'm not buying it unless somebody wants to offer the Rangers that much for those players. I don't see it. I think it's more of an accountability thing. I'm not buying it.
Well, the Rangers did not play well against St. Louis the other night. They lost 5-2, but let's try to look at this objectively. You knew that the Blues players were going to come out with a little extra jump in their step because this was Jim Montgomery's first game as their new coach, so they were going to have some extra juice. It really didn't surprise me that the Blues won that game, but there was just, and I saw parts of the game. I didn't see the whole thing, but there were parts of the game where the Rangers just, they looked like they were not in sync. Mm-hmm. And so they've got to straighten that out. I think you're right, though. I think that might have been leaked to kind of, I don't know, generate some accountability. But I'll tell you what, there's a risk with that. There is a risk with that. I mean, do you really want to piss off one of your star players to the point where, like, do they want me here?
Yep.
Now, maybe it jumpstarts him and he goes on a goal-scoring tear and they run off a bunch of, I mean, it's New York, right? It's the media capital of the world, so anything's possible. But, I mean, moving him unless you get something significant, I don't see it either. But, they need to get things straightened out. We're at the quarter mark. We talked a couple of weeks ago about, certain teams that need to right the ship. And, the Rangers are one of them. But to me, behind the scenes, that Shesterkin thing is becoming a distraction. They're not saying it is, but I think they've got to put that to bed at some point and just, play hockey.
Yeah. Let's talk some Devils because we're in OT right now on this podcast, past the certain 30-minute mark. But right now, Sheldon Keefe, 24 games in, Devils are looking pretty good right now. They had a fast start of the season, had a little bit of a lull, but got themselves back on track. It seems to me that once they've had some time to actually practice after the European games, he's got them rolling right now. The confidence is high. Where do you think Sheldon Keefe stands? How would you grade him?
I would give him a solid B+. I think he's done very, very well. There's going to be that part of the season, which we saw, where things were a little rocky. They got off to a little bit of a rough start. They went to Prague. They played well there. And they came back. And to me, this is kind of where I expected them to be after, having a new coach and making all these changes. The goaltending has really been solidified. That was the Achilles heel last year. I mean, Jacob Markstrom and Jake Allen have both played very, very well. And I think Keefe has done a good job. I mean, the jump seems to be back in the team. Their transition game has been 100% better than last year. The way they break the puck out and just the way that they spring the forwards out of the offensive zone. I mean, the Hughes brothers specifically, both Jack and Luke have got this other gear that when they get to, they're just gone. And there's very few people that can catch them. And even, I think his impact on some of the veterans, Timo Meier, for example, it seemed to light a fire under him. I mean, he's been playing very well and had a little issue last night. But I think they've done very well so far, and I expect them to keep rolling on and right now I believe they've got the second best record in the league. I think they're behind only Winnipeg.
Yeah, and I don't, look, a lot of people would say, well, they play more games than everybody else, but to me that's irrelevant, okay? The fact of the matter is they are looking good. They're confident. They're playing for each other. They're physical. They've got veteran leadership right now. The young kids are now starting to mature even more. Nico Hischier scoring that hat trick last night, saying it took 7.5 years to get there, and the crowd went bonkers when he was being interviewed post-game on MSG. And, right now the Juju is good in New Jersey. They play Monty's St. Louis Blues tomorrow. I'll be at American Whiskey tomorrow for those that are listening in for Game Day Live and Devils After Dark. It's one of the more favorite times of the year, the day before a holiday, such as Thanksgiving, or, they don't play on Christmas Eve, but December 23rd is like that Festivus game. If your team is playing at home, you got to go. You have to go. Everybody's holly jolly. Everyone's going to get all liquored up. We're going to see chicken fingers flying. No, I'm just kidding. But it's always a good time, Bruce. Always a good time. And I can't wait to see my friends there, like Wimpy, see Morgan's chiming in, Joseph Lenham, Corbin, in the YouTube Live. Sorry we didn't really get to the comments today, but we're going to have to jet Bruce. Just want to wish everybody a happy early Thanksgiving, because we won't be on this Thursday because of the holiday, but we'll make it up to you on Saturday or Sunday this week.
Well, happy Thanksgiving to you too, and don't eat too much.
Oh, don't worry. That is a problem. I have a little bit of an eating problem, Bruce. It's widely known.
No, I don't know, Sam. I work hard to have this Atlas-like physique.
Yeah. Well, you know what? It's what my wife would say. You enjoy being fat. Anyway.
Happy Thanksgiving, buddy.
Yeah, happy Thanksgiving. Till next time, let's go Devils.